Hey, how's it going?
It's coming along. It's going okay.
You know, I think you ought to spend some time with him. Play some catch with him. Show him you love him.
I do love him. I bought him a brand new bike, and he's got his computer to play with.
I really think he just wants to spend some time with you.
I just bought him a brand new mitt, too. He knows that I love him.
Welcome again to another session of Growing Kids God's Way. In this particular session, we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to be talking about how to communicate love one to another, to our mates, to our children, in such a way that they actually have the full sensation of love. This is an exciting lesson for all of us, Anne-Marie.
It is. You're going to have a lot of fun, and hopefully you're going to learn a lot about not only yourself, but your mate, and again, your children. And the theme for tonight is every day we choose to love. And every day we choose not to love.
You know, in that scenario that we just saw, it's probably very common. A little boy playing catch by himself, dad busy in his office, mom concerned about that relationship. There's probably more to that scenario than just what we saw. We're going to talk about it when we come back with our class. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our third session of Growing Kids God's Way. In this session, we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to talk about how to communicate love. If you remember, in our last session, we talked about the importance of the husband-wife relationship and how significant that relationship is in the process of bringing security to your child. Now, we're talking about the husband-wife relationship, not simply the parent-child relationship. The major theme of our last session was communicating to your child or creating an environment for your child that would cause them to be secure in your love for each other. That is so primary for a child. In this session, we're going to turn the corner and we're going to talk about the practical side of love. We're going to talk about what love looks like. We're going to be looking at some of the fundamental truths about man's capacity for love. In fact, on your outline, let's get started with that. Learning to do the words of love. Let's start right there with letter A. Understand this. God put within man the capacity to feel love, and equally important is the capacity to communicate love. Man has both abilities. He has both capacities. One is to feel love and to know that he is loved or she is loved. But also, we all have the capacity to communicate love to others, those around us, those within our family and outside of our family. Now, these capacities really make sense. After all, man was created in the image and likeness of God. Certainly, God, as the universal creator, is a God of love. We know that. In fact, we know that God is love because the Bible teaches us that. In 1 John 4, 7, and 8, we read this: Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. Now listen, love is so important to God that He made it a distinctive identifying mark of His people, of the church. Jesus said in John 13, 34 and 35, "This new commandment I give you, that you love one another. Even as I have loved you, so shall you love one another." And then He explains that commandment. when he says, by this, by what? By the love of this new commandment. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. In other words, Jesus introduced for the first time in humanity a new badge of identification, and that badge is the badge of love. He said, this is what's going to separate you out. This is what's going to identify you as my people. Love is supremely important to God. So what we have here in just these few verses from 1 John 4, 7 and 8 and from John 13, 34 and 35, we have two primary truths. Number one, love is a command, and number two, it serves a kingdom purpose. Do not forget that. In fact, as I will remind you from our very first lesson, that parenting in the mind of God is a kingdom issue, that our parenting has to go far beyond just our own pleasure, just for our own comfort, that there's a bigger picture that we are participating in. We are kingdom builders when we put the values that reflect God's holiness into the hearts of our children. But the question for tonight is, what does love look like? We know, see on your outline, that love has two sides. We love in action. Every one of us will love in action. That is, there are certain things that we do. We do for our wives, or as wives you do for your husbands. We do for our children. It's love in action. This is the giving side of love. But we also know that we love in feeling. That is, this is the receiving side of love. When someone communicates love to us, we feel their love. We appreciate that love. We have a sense about that love. So love is both action and it's feeling. Now, if that was all there shouldn't be too many problems in marriages, but obviously there is. Because the problem that many marriages, and really in parenting, many parents with their children, especially their middle years and teenage children, problems that they have is because mothers and fathers and husbands and wives and children all have different touch points of love. Different touch points of love. Or another way to say it is, we all connect with love differently. And because of that, sometimes love becomes extremely frustrating. And sometimes it's extremely discouraging. I think you moms know this. You know, you work all day long and you communicate to your children love in so many different ways. And and then your husband comes home and you communicate love to your husband. And then you wonder, you sit back at the end of the day wondering, does anyone appreciate me? Does anyone appreciate all that I do in this place? Because you may not hear it, or maybe there's not a gesture coming back to you. And although you try to love, 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 there are moments when it's frustrating. Same thing with husbands. You know, we know we're supposed to bring the flowers home on that day in February, and we know we're supposed to do the birthday cards and try to get the right date, and same thing with the anniversary. And we go through all of this and maybe that special dinner, and sometimes we set it up and it's not the right time, and we feel in a sense rejected. We feel frustrated in love, and that happens. Now in this session, I want to teach you how to say I love you to your mates and to your children, so that you are actually targeting your love in such a way that they actually feel love. They have the full sensation of love. What we're going to do is we're going to help you discover each other's touch point of love. Let me introduce this concept by way of analogy. Let me share a story with you about a trip that I had taken to the former Soviet Union a number of years ago. I was doing some teaching there, met with some pastors. We had one day off, and I always wanted to see Red Square, and I found myself on this one day standing at the entrance of Red Square, and it was something to see, realizing all of the hundreds and hundreds of years of history that took place right there. And as I was really sort of taking it all in, I noticed that there was a small crowd of people gathering in the middle of Red Square. And out of curiosity, I began to walk over towards them to find out what they were gathering for. And when I got there, I realized that I was standing in front of Lenin's tomb. And the reason the people had gathered was because they were about to exchange guards, and it was quite a ceremony to see this. You will see the same thing in many of the European countries, in England, and certainly in this case in Moscow, where you have the changing of the guards, and it's quite a military celebration as the guards switch and everyone takes notice. Well, as the guards began to do their goose-step march down towards the guards that were standing in front of Lenin's tomb, as the crowd was all pressing in, as everyone, you could just feel the anticipation. I heard over to my left. Now, you got to understand, most of the people there were speaking Russian. I don't speak Russian. So it was sort of like a humming in my ears. It didn't mean anything to me. But as the guards were coming down, I heard over to my left these words. Hey, Larry, come on over here. You can get a great shot. And immediately I turned. English. Someone spoke English in Red Square on that day. Now, I turned. No one else turned. No one was even fazed by it. Why was I so caught up with those words? The reason was because English is my primary native language. It's the language I know. It's the language I speak. It's the language I feel most comfortable with. We've been living in Southern California, Anne-Marie and I, long enough that Spanish is really our second strongest, or more appropriately said, second weakest language. If Spanish was being spoken that day in Red Square, I would have picked it up. Not as quickly as English, but certainly a lot faster than if it was just Russian. French is my third weakest language. If French was being spoken that day in Red Square, I would have picked it up, but not as quickly as Spanish. Spanish I'm more familiar with. And certainly not as quickly as English. Because English is my native tongue. That's the tongue I speak, that's the one I hear, that's the one I tune into. When the crowd was gathering, everyone was up on their tippy toes, and you got a little shoving in the crowd that goes on, not intentionally, but I began to trip a little, and as I did, my heel kicked the person behind me. And so I immediately turned around and said, "Excuse me," to this person. Now, this person has no clue what I was saying. I could have been saying, "Hey, buddy, your mother drives a tank." I could have said anything. Now, English is what I said. I spoke English. I didn't get out my Russian English translation book. I just spoke English because it just naturally flowed out of me. Now, the lessons of that day serves as a guide to the principles that I want to share with you right now. The same thing that happened in Red Square in Moscow that day is true with emotional languages. It's that sometimes you may be emotionally speaking your native tongue, but it comes across as a foreign language to the person you're talking to. And the reason that sort of thing happens emotionally is because we tend to only speak love languages that we are most familiar with or we are most accustomed to. And we tend to assume, naturally, that everyone else understands our emotional language. Just like in that day when I turned around and said, "Excuse me," to the man behind me. I didn't even give a second thought that that person doesn't speak English. All through the day, we do the same thing emotionally. We say, "I love you," in our primary touchstone, our primary love language, to our children, to our husbands, to our wives, when in fact their emotional love language may not be the same. And therein lies so many of our problems. We tend to be insensitive to the emotional love languages of those around us, so our love message sometimes is reduced to nothing more than a humming in our ears. But we're going to fix that potential problem right now as we look at the 5 touch points of love. Consider these emotional languages. Let's write them down in your outlines. Let's get started. Love language number 1, this first touch point of love, can be described as encouraging words. Encouraging words. The Apostle Paul identifies the power of love when he told the Corinthians that love edifies, 1 Corinthians 8:1. That means love is communicated when we rightly build up others through verbal encouragement. For example, just kind words or encouraging words. "You're such a compassionate person. I could learn so much from you." Or, "That dress so compliments you." Or, "I love your hair. Is that new?" Or, my all-time favorite, which I love hearing, "Have you been losing weight?" Those are words of encouragement. Those are words that I long for. But really what they are legitimate words of praise. For some people, words of encouragement, words of praise, that is their primary love language. That means that they feel most loved when they hear words of encouragement. That is important for all of us. Not frivolous words, not words that are anything less than serious or a true compliment. But for some, there is no greater way to express the language of love than through words of legitimate praise and recognition. A second love language is acts of service. Now, the Apostle John encouraged Christians to love in action through deeds and truth, 1 John 3:18. That is another way of communicating love through acts of service. Now what is acts of service? Acts of service is doing something for another person over and above the routine. It's doing something for another person that you know they're really going to appreciate. For example, for a dad, maybe it's putting gas in your wife's car on Sunday night so that when she takes the kids to school all week long, she doesn't have to worry about it. Or maybe it's finally going around fixing the leaky faucet, or whatever it may be. But it's doing something for the other person over and above, but something you know they're really going to appreciate. I love having a clean patio. We have a little patio, and it's underneath a tree, and this tree is always dropping things on it, and I sweep that patio. And sometimes on the weekend, if I can't get to it, or on Monday I can't get to that patio, I know on Tuesday I'm going to have to sweep the patio or I'm not going to sleep at night. Well, Tuesdays, when there's been a busy Monday, I'll come home thinking I need to sweep the patio. But I'll get home and the patio would have been swept. Anne-Marie swept the patio. Now, Anne-Marie likes a clean patio too. But Anne-Marie was choosing to love me in an act of service because she knows how much it means to me. And that heightens the love sensation. Knowing that someone did something for you, something that you were going to do, but you so appreciate it that they did it for you. A third love language is gift giving. The greatest gift of love the world has ever known is Christ, who gave himself for the church. Ephesians 5:25 tells us that. Gift giving is another way of saying, I love you. Although a simple gesture, it packs great meaning because of what it represents. Impromptu gift giving, as opposed to the Christmas and the birthday gift giving, which you have to because if you want to live to see the next morning, you have to do that. Impromptu gift giving communicates this one central truth. When we were apart, you were so on my mind, I was driven to pick up a token of our love relationship. That's what it means. I mean, even if you were buying a gag gift for someone, the very fact that you saw something really cute and say, oh, Gary would love this, the very fact that you thought of the person sends a powerful love message. Gift giving. It's part of the love marriage bond of every society, primitive or complex. It's a way of saying, I love you through gifts. A fourth love language is quality time. The gospel record provides insights to the quality time Jesus had with his heavenly Father and the men that he discipled. Although his goal was to train them for ministry service, he recognized time was needed, quality time. Now, quality time with the Master brought conformity to their thinking. Quality time is important. Quality time is a way of saying, I love you. Quality time is a way of saying, I want to spend time with you. Now, gentlemen, for your wife's sake, let me explain what quality time is not. Quality time is not saying to your wife on Monday night, hey, honey, want to sit next to me? We'll watch the football game together? That's a nice thing to do, but that's not necessarily quality time. It's not picking up the newspaper and reading the sports section to her. That's nice, but that's not quality time. Quality time must be confined to an understanding where there's a transfer of heart feelings, not just facts of the day, not just what you did, but actually being together and honestly probing one another's heart, responding, doing both speaking and listening. That's quality time. The fifth love language is physical touch and closeness. Physical touch and closeness. I've often wondered what it would have been like to have been that child in Mark chapter 10, verses 13 through 16, who Jesus, King of the universe, picked up, put on his lap, and then used as an example. God made us physical creatures. We are creatures that love to touch, love to be close. But for some, this is a primary love language. It could be holding hands, it could be putting your arm around your spouse's shoulder, or just standing next to your spouse, next to your child, or your child next to you. But that sends a special love signal to them, a love message. Just being near to each other. Physical touch and closeness is supremely important. Again, it can be as basic as holding hands. It can go all the way to the act of marital intimacy, or anywhere in between. It's just physically being with each other. Now, ladies and gentlemen, those 5 love languages I have just given you, words of encouragement, acts of service, gift giving, quality time, and physical touch and closeness. Out of that list of 5 we just discussed, one of those means more to you than the other 4. And there's going to be one on that list that's going to mean the least to you. You say, well, I don't really need this one. But there is one on that list that becomes, or in fact is, your touch point of love. And we're going to need to discover that. Let me give you some scenarios, first of all, to really develop this a little bit further, some examples. Let's take the example of physical touch. That'll be the husbands. That'll be Matt and Sue. We'll use them. Physical touch versus words of encouragement. Matt was physical touch. Sue was words of encouragement. This is a true story. After a conference, a couple came to us about 2 weeks later, and they shared how this particular teaching was such a tremendous help in their marriage. They had a good Christian marriage. I mean, it wasn't aflame with love. There was still, the pilot was still on, at least. But this changed everything because it brought fulfillment to them. It happened that the husband's primary love language, that which meant the most to him, was physical touch and closeness. But his number 5, the least on his list, words of encouragement. Guess what her number 1 was? Words of encouragement. And her number 5, physical touch and closeness. They were exactly the opposite. So he would be saying, love physically, honey, how about a hug? She would be saying, send me a letter. Because she wanted words of encouragement. Physical touch and closeness, you could cuddle your cat if you want physical touch and closeness. Write me something beautiful. Words that flow from your heart. So for that wife, words of encouragement, that was number 1. They loved each other, but they kept missing each other. He was saying, I love you physically. She was saying, I love you in words of encouragement. When they learned this lesson, when they learned that really what love is, love, in fact, is something that we do every day. We choose to love every day, and we choose not to love every day. When they learned to choose to love each other in the other's primary love language, everything turned around. He started to leave notes around the house, something very simple. Something, honey, love you, see you when you get home. That little note meant so much to her because her primary is words of encouragement. But it's more than just words. It's the fact that you would take the time to say the words. That's what brings greater meaning. When he was going out the door, she would say, honey, don't go out the door. I need to give you your hug first before you go to the office. That sent a very positive signal. That sent a signal that she really does love me. She connected with his touch point, his primary touch point. He was connecting with her primary touch point. They took the pilot, and again, the flame was restored back to the marriage. There are other illustrations like this. There are times when you have a husband with acts of service, that's his predominant, and you have a wife who, in fact, is quality time. The scenario looks like this when they come through the door. They hug, they embrace. The wife says she's got so much to tell her husband. She says, honey, the mail and I got the phone calls, and how about if I make some coffee before you get into tonight's activities? We just sit down on the couch a little bit and we can share, and I can share what happened today, and you can tell me about your big meeting at the office. So the husband agrees and says, well, okay, that'll be fine. Why don't you go in and make the coffee and get some of that cheese and crackers, put them out. I'll just change my clothes and I'll be right back out. So the wife goes in as a dutiful wife. She gets everything done. The coffee's made. She brings it out, but the husband's still not there. And so she gently calls into the bedroom, honey, darling, are you coming? And from the bedroom she hears, be right there, sweetie. There were some clothes on the bed, and I'm putting them away, so we don't have to worry about that later. And so she thinks, what a wonderful man. And then a few moments goes by, the coffee's getting colder, she's getting a little bit warm, and she says, darling, you said you would sit with me. I got everything out here. Be right there, honey. I was just coming out. I was hanging up my tie, but the light bulb burnt out. I'm going to fix it and change it so you don't stub your toe tonight. And she's thinking, well, he's caring. And then a few moments later, he's dashing through the kitchen, and he's going to throw the light bulb away. And she says, now, honey, you going to sit down with me now? And he says, be right there, sweetie. The garbage is full. I'm going to just take it out so we don't have to worry about it. And now she's lost into the garage. So eventually she finds her way to the garage. She says, you said you were going to sit with me. And from an echo chamber, because he's got his head in the dryer, honey, the dryer stopped, and might as well bring the clothes in. No use doing 2 trips. I'll be right there. Eventually, this guy finds his way to the couch, and the wife's there, and the coffee's cold, and she's hot. And he says, what do you want to talk about, darling? And she says, well, I don't want to talk. Well, why did you go through all of this? You told me you wanted to talk. Well, I did want to talk, but I don't think that you love me. He says, love you? Love you? What are you saying? I come home. You know how many women would give anything to have a husband like me? I put away the laundry, I change the light bulb, I take the garbage out, I bring the laundry in. If you don't have anything to talk about, I still got to do the kitchen floor tonight. The problem? They really did love each other. but they never connected at each other's primary touch point. She said, I love you means spend 10 minutes with me on the couch. He said, I love you means acts of service. He did love her, but he loved her in his primary, not her primary. See, folks, the summary of all of this is what you have to learn is what is your primary? More importantly, what is your mate's primary? What are your children's primary love languages? And then you need to choose to speak those languages to them. Right now, we're going to stop. What I want you to do is I want you to take your test. It's at the end of your chapter. It's the love language test. It's to help you understand exactly what your primary love language is and actually your whole ranking. We want both of you to take that test. Take a few minutes after you're done. We want you to discuss it. Right after that, Anne-Marie's going to join me for our wrap-up time, and she's going to give us some of her insights as to the practical side of how to say, I love you. So take that test right now, and we'll be right back. Well, Anne-Marie, this was a fun lesson to teach. I'm always excited to communicate how to say I love you, simply because I know after they take their exam, so many new ideas pop into their minds about how they have been communicating love and how tomorrow morning they need to communicate love. Give me some of your thoughts.
Yes, and one thing, it's going to give you a wonderful topic for your couch time. You know, if you're beginning to run out of what do we do during couch time, you can talk about your love languages. A couple of things, though, as you were teaching, just want to make clear, when you talked about the words of encouragement, you know, they build up, if that happens to be your primary love language, and it's not my primary, but it's very close to my primary, that discouraging words really cut a lot deeper. I know growing up, I mean, I didn't understand about love languages then, and it would frustrate me so much, you know, family members or whatever, they might make jokes, and I would take it personal. And all my life, I heard, you're just too sensitive. Well, once I understood this whole thing about love languages, I thought, well, this makes more sense because it's so high on my list that when jokes were made at my expense, it really hurt. So it wasn't that I was so super sensitive, it's just that understanding that whole aspect. So if, you know, if love language and words of encouragement's high, we have to be sensitive for that, not only in our as a spouse, but with our children as well.
Well, I was just going to say, especially the spouse has to understand if words encourage, then discouraging words cut deep, and so you have to remember that if that's one of your high love languages. What about our own family?
Well, for us, we actually are very fortunate that we share the same primary love language of physical touch and closeness, since we do spend a lot of time together. But our girls, they're both different. Amy's is quality time, Jenny's is gift giving, and it's really important to understand what your children's love languages are, their primary love language, because of how they're going to interact with you and each other as well.
Well, you could misdiagnose behavior. I know, just for an example, if I stopped at the store and picked up a pack of Tic Tacs, let's say for Jenny. Now, Jenny's primary love language is gift giving. If I picked up a pack of Tic Tacs for Jenny, and I just brought them home and said, Jenny, here's some Tic Tacs I was in the store, and I bought these for you. Jenny's response would be, Dad, this is wonderful. Thank you so much. You're such a sweet man. She would hug me, and she would kiss me, think, that is so sweet of you. Now, Amy's primary love language is quality time, but number 5 for her is gift giving. Christmas is fun at her house. Now, if I bought a pack of Tic Tacs, just a little thing of Tic Tacs, and brought them home and gave them to Amy, say, Amy, I was in the store and I thought of you, and here's some Tic Tacs. Amy's response would be completely different than Jenny's. Amy would be more likely, oh Dad, if it's my breath, just tell me. Just, don't be indirect, just tell me directly. And see, her response would be completely different because she's a different child. Her love language, primary, second, third, fourth, and fifth, her arrangement is completely different. And I think, honey, this brings us really to the core of what we want to talk to you about. Not only do you have to learn each other's primary love language, just to have that love renewed in your own relationship, it is primary, it is so important that you understand the love languages of your children, because truly, in one way, in one sense, their love needs make them go completely unmet. In fact, what I'd like to do right now is let's just pause right here. Let's everyone take a look at our scenario that we showed at the top of the session. Let's think through what is happening now that we've taught you about love languages. Let's go to that scenario right now.
Hey, how's it going?
It's coming along. It's going okay.
You know, I think you ought to spend some time with him. Play some catch with him. Show him you love him.
I do love him. I bought him a brand new bike, and he's got his computer to play with.
I really think he just wants to spend some time with you.
I just bought him a brand new mitt, too. He knows that I love him.
Well, that was really a pretty sobering scene again. Honey, some thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's probably something that occurs all too often in homes all around the world, actually. And, you know, as you saw, the young boy, he wanted Dad to spend some quality time with him. And Dad thought, well, I got him a bike, you know, that's his gift giving. So he was speaking his love language to his son wanting something different, so neither one of them are communicating. And so it is important that we understand exactly what our children's love languages are and our mates, so that we can speak in a way that they feel loved.
Do you think it's possible that in the parent-child relationship that children can grow up in homes where moms and dads can completely miss communicating to a child in his or her primary love language, and so you end up with maybe some disastrous results in the teen years when in fact it wasn't so much a dynamic of relationship or being unfair or a child being exasperated, but it was the absence of love?
And it very well can be something that simple. And I know this is a tool to help build a healthy relationship. Just the scenarios you're saying that reminds me of several years ago we were counseling with a family that were having some struggles with their 17-year-old. And we taught them and told them about love languages, and they said, oh, we've been speaking our daughter's love language, it's gift giving. Well, we had opportunity to spend some time with the daughter as well. She wanted to spend time with her parents.
Yeah.
It was quality time was what she really desired from them. She says, they keep giving me these gifts. I don't want the gifts. I want them.
That's right, because the parents were in a position to buy gifts.
Right.
But I remember that she yearned just to have mom and dad's presence. That's what she wanted. So these are some things that you have to remember. Some of you have gone through your list and you're saying, you know, I know my ranking now. I really like the first one, the second one. I don't need the third, fourth, and fifth. Well, the fact is, you not only need all five, you need to learn to communicate all five, because all the people around you, someone has a touch point of one of those five. You need to know how to say I love you to everyone. Gentlemen, this is going to help you understand your mother-in-law better. If you want to get your mother-in-law on your side, learn her love language. It's going to be wonderful. Right now, let's just stop right here. Let's take some questions from you folks, and we can fine-tune our teaching through those questions, and then we'll go to our summary and close down the session. Who's got a question?
How does love languages tie into spiritual gifts?
That's a rather common question, and it can be answered very simply. When we study and we look at the spiritual gifts in Scripture, we find that the spiritual gifts are all one way. By that I mean the person who has the spiritual gift of giving loves to give. But they don't need anything in response. They don't need someone to give back to them in order to feel loved. The person who has the gift of helps loves to show up on Saturday morning at 7 o'clock and help tackle that project that they talked about at church last week. But they don't need someone to come over and work on their roof the next week in order to feel loved. So all spiritual gifts are one way. It's empowered by the Holy Spirit working through a person to give to the body of Christ, to edify the body of Christ. What we're talking about in terms of the love languages, these are two ways. You identify it not only by what you enjoy receiving, but also by what you do. So if you enjoy hearing words of encouragement, your natural tendency, because it's a love language, you tend to speak words of encouragement to others. So spiritual gifts are one way, love languages are two ways. Okay, let's have another question. Yes, this young lady here.
My husband came up with a different order for my love language than I did.
How do we know who is right?
Honey?
Well, that does happen sometimes, and many times people around us are more apt to be able to identify our love languages than we are ourselves because they hear us all the time or they watch us. But there is that possibility that, and I'm going to just use words of encouragement, that could be your primary. And it's been your primary, but it was abused maybe as you were growing up. The people that were around and close to you either didn't give you those really encouraging words or were very flippant with it. So you kind of thought, that tends to hurt, so you go to the next one. So what your mate or others might see is maybe it's acts of service, and they say, oh, that's your primary love language. And deep down inside, words of encouragement really is. And so it's a mutual talking back and forth, and then just observe. I mean, this is a new concept. Actually, we would suggest that you, after you go home and you talk about it a little bit more, make some 3x5 cards and put down, each one's love language. Put your children's love language on there as well. Take a magnet and put it up on your refrigerator. It took us probably a good month or so before we really were able to discern exactly where each one fit. And so that would be the suggestion, and do that. And as far as your kids go, especially if you have children, that are older, sit down with them and kind of go through the lesson with them as well, and ask them, even for your, middle years child and older, and go through the different ones and see how they respond to it.
Yeah. I think as a general rule, though, don't you think, honey, that other people will be able to identify yours sooner than you will?
Usually.
Simply because other people will give you the consensus. And so it's not a matter that your husband's always right, but if your husband and all your friends say this is the way it looks, that's the way it probably is. Okay. Let's take maybe a couple more questions.
Yeah, Gary, I was wondering, what age can we expect to see a child's love language show up?
We will say, first of all, do not go home and try to figure out your 1 or 2 year olds' love languages, because they're not going to emerge. I had a conversation with one of my daughters just a couple of weeks ago. She has a 4-year-old or 5-year-old, and she was sharing with me that she felt that this child was starting to demonstrate a physical touch and closeness love language. She wasn't positive, but it began to emerge. Certainly what we're going to say to you is by the age of 7, your children's love languages begin to show themselves on a regular basis, that you can start having confidence. Before 7, all children love all 5 of them. So just enjoy your child and let them enjoy all aspects, each touch point, but do not try to narrow just one, because what happens is, mothers and fathers, if you get the wrong one in the beginning, you're going to be speaking that wrong love language when in fact at this point they love them all. Right now then, let's go to our summary points, back to your outlines, and let's just review this, and Anne-Marie will bring some final thoughts to it.
Okay, you can follow along in your outline. It says love languages are not biblical injunctions. Love is the biblical injunction, and that's important to realize. The love languages is a vehicle demonstrating the biblical principle of love. It's one way of showing what love looks like. 2, your primary love language is evidenced in 2 ways. You tend to speak it more often than the others, and you feel most loved when it's spoken to you. 3, these touch points in children begin to emerge with some order by the age of 7. We already talked about that. Feeling love is not the basis of right behavior, no more than not feeling love is the justification for wrong behavior, and that's really a critical point. Love languages isn't a tool to use to manipulate people to get what you want. It's unconditional love that we are giving to one another. 5, we believe the order of a person's love language is God-given. It's kind of like maybe a little addendum to the temperaments. And 6, every day we choose to love, and every day we choose not to love. And that's one of the key principles of the whole lesson.
Exactly. Honey, I guess the best way to summarize this is to go back to John chapter 13, verse 34, when Jesus said, "This new commandment I give you, that you love one another." And the key is, even as I have loved you. So when you look at that, you have to ask yourself, how did he love us? When we were least lovable in the state of sin, he loved us. There are times when we are least lovable, when it takes a lot of energy to say to a person who's not so lovable, I love you. I know there were times when maybe I was rough and gruff and maybe with the kids, and I had a bad day, and I would turn to Amy and say, Amy, why did you do this? Or why is this not in place? Or why wasn't this sent out? And instead of Amy saying, well, Dad, you know, you got a problem. You need to take a nap and wake up in 2 weeks, which she would have the right to say, so often Amy would do something very simple, a beautiful gesture. She would just come over to me, put her arms around me. She would come over to me very carefully, of course, put her arms around me, but then she would just whisper, Daddy, you must have had a terrible day. And when she did that, when I was least lovely, when she loved me in spite of the way I was, that was such a powerful message that she diffused all of the day's hostilities simply by saying, let me communicate love to you in your primary love language, physical touch and closeness. It was something very beautiful. There will be days, I'm sure, maybe even this week, when one of you in this audience will do something that is not so lovely, and your mate's going to have opportunity to minister, to love you even as Jesus loved us when we were least lovely, in that moment, at that point, saying, I love you to your mate. We want you to go home. We want you to review again the lesson. You have a reading assignment. Come on back next time. We're going to be talking about the Father's mandate. That is a very special presentation. I'm excited about presenting it to you, dads, because I come to you, young men, with a great sense of urgency. All that I have learned in my years of being a dad, I want to share with you. Those mistakes that I made, I want to make sure that you guys don't make them. So join us next time. Thanks for being with us this time.